I'm Jack Kerr, chair of the Friends of the Institute, and I'm delighted that we have such a great turnout tonight. I understand we have a record turnout for a Friends talk. And I think that's a great credit to Pia. Obviously, there is a lot of interest in Princeton in what Pia has been writing about, particularly what she's been writing about us. Now, Lanny Jones has been working with Pia to have her work published here in America, and I'm going to invite him to step forward and introduce her and to take care of a little Dutch custom. Lanny?
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here at the Super Bowl press preview. That's what it feels like, and my job is to introduce Katy Perry, who's a halftime entertainment. But I really am happy to be here to see so many people here, so many friends of the Institute, friends of Pia, as we call them, FOPs. So judging by the size of the turnout, a lot of you are curious to know, I'm curious to know more about Pia and her writing. We could have all asked her one at a time, but it seemed a lot better an idea to have one conversation rather than 150 separate conversations. So this evening, we will have a single conversation between Pia and all of us. I'll say a few things by way of introduction. So what should you know about Pia before we talk to her? Well, firstly, that she's a late bloomer as a writer. She had 2 early careers as a therapist and a business consultant, and she liberated the writer in her in just the last 10 years. But since 2007, Pia has written 2 novels, 2 books for children, many stories and magazine articles, and by my count, more than 250 newspaper columns. In 2010, she began writing a Sunday column for the Dutch Financial Daily that was really the mirror opposite of a dry financial column. It's almost a series of mini short stories. Then, when Pia and Robert and their family moved here in 2012, another Amsterdam daily, the NRC Handelsblad, asked her to write a weekly column about her life in the United States, which she does faithfully every single Tuesday. It's called Flessenpost, that's on the word on the publication there, which means notes in a bottle. Now, since 2012, she has written 120 straight Flessenpost in 120 weeks. She has missed not a single week. That is really quite unusual. I mean, I don't know any newspaper and columnist in the world who has done something like that. I have found a way early on to begin reading her columns and usually misreading them in butchered translations by an internet opportunity called Google Mistranslate, as I know it. But what I found in Google Mistranslate is a writer who is very sharp, very wise about the big issues and observant about the little things that happen in the nooks and crannies of life. A columnist needs to be good company, and week after week, Pia is. Her tone combines a little bit of Tocqueville and a little bit of Russell Baker. Remember Russell Baker? He was so charming. But she is full of social insight, but also humanistic and empathetic, self-deprecating, and at times very funny, thanks in part to her delightful illustrator, Eliana Garrett's. And these are Eliana's original illustrations here for many of the columns that Pia has done. So in total, Pia writes about the American character, sort of uppercase, but also many American characters, lowercase. Among the topics she has written about are puppy training, Freeman Dyson, who is here, the place where the Martians landed in Grover's Mill, New Jersey, Dutch bread, she likes, American cheese, rich people in New York and poor people in Trenton, and a woman standing in front of her in the line at the CVS on Nassau Street. And not even Tocqueville or Russell Baker took on yoga moms or back to school night, but Pia did. So in just 580 words per column, she holds up an unblinking mirror to American life. Quite socially aware, by the way. She's written among the organizations here that she's written about are Centurion Ministries, which I think many of you know is run by Jim McCluskey, and the Crisis Ministry of Mercer County. It can be refreshing to watch this very direct Dutch woman, however, struggle with everything from political correctness to air conditioning. As she told her Dutch readers in one column, Americans cannot imagine a life without temperature control. Of course, she wrote that in the summer, I think. You should all be warned, by the way, that every experience Pia has the potential to be fodder for a column. Nothing is off limits. She has written about her own colonoscopy. And if you think you are safe here tonight, you are not. She has written columns about 2 previous Friends events. So last summer, Pia's Dutch publisher, Prometheus, compiled more than 100 of her columns into a book, also called Flessenpost. And that's here. And you can order copies of Flessenpost at the Friendly Institute Friends rate, right over there by putting down your name. She has now translated a few of the Dutch Flessenpost into English and published what we call the mini Pia, which is here. And many of you could pick this up on the way in or on the way out, whichever you wish, with the help of a very talented art director named Maria Kosman. Maria, are you here? Will you wave so we know who you are? Where are you? He's way back over there someplace. Maria did just a terrific job on this booklet. The booklet actually contains more than just her columns. It has opening pages of her prize-winning novel, Lange Dagen, as well as an op-ed piece she wrote in 2013 for the Washington Post, her first publication in English. A few other factoids you should know. You can find just about all of Pia's Dutch and English writings on her new website, which is piadejong.com. And she published a new short story this week in Wild River Review, an online literary magazine edited by Joy Stocky, who is here too. Joy, where are you? There she is there. You can get her URL from Joy and look that up. And Pia will have another story published this spring in a Dead Tree publication called the Antioch Review. Now for a format tonight, basically Pia has a Dutch tradition she's going to explain. She will then read a couple of her columns. I'll ask her a few questions to sort of prime the pump. Then we turn it over to you to ask questions from all of you. And I think she will conclude by reading something from her current memoir in progress. Pia?
Well, thank you all, and that was a very nice introduction, Lenny. I'm extremely pleased to be here tonight, and I'm very happy that you all came in such great, amount of people. And of course, I want to thank a few people. I want to thank the friends here with the big F who gave me this, in their program the ability to speak here. And I want to thank the IAS, the Institute, and the people who organized this, because it's very nicely done, and they were so supporting from day one that we arrived here. Then I want to thank my family, my kids, my husband, who are here, which is very nice. And as Lenny said, everything is fodder for my column. Also my kids. And if you're a teenager and your mom writes about you, it can be very embarrassing. But they stood with me and they could handle it. And then, of course, there's my family overseas, who I miss very much, and thought they're here, even though they're asleep. And especially, I want to thank my father, who died 3 years ago on this day, which is also my birthday. And yeah, so he died on my birthday, and he was so excited that we went to the United States, and he so much wanted to be here, and he already had an airplane ticket, and then he passed away. But in thought, he's here. Then there's a Dutch tradition when you write a new book, and in a way I consider this my debut in the United States, my first book, you give it to somebody you want to thank particularly. And so I wanted to keep with that custom, even though the Americans have another custom. And there's a little story that I want to tell you about this. When you write columns, and I've been writing columns for years, the fun part is that you get comments. And so my comments came from, they came from the people I met at the bakery where I bought my bread for years in Amsterdam. They also came from my very opinionated neighbor called Mackie, who would, just bluntly criticize and say whatever came in his mind. And there were the Writers' Cafe on Friday night where we all sat together and comment on work. And that was very nice. And, you get feedback and you know what to write about. And then when I went to Princeton and I was asked by the NRC Handelsblad to write a weekly column, that's what I did. And I wrote my piece and I put it in a bottle and I threw it in the ocean. And then nothing. No comment, nada, nip, nothing. And it was a little bit upsetting and also strange. So I was, after a few weeks, I thought like maybe I should stop this because nobody is reading me and I don't get the hard copy of the newspaper. And then after a few months, Lenny Jones and Sarah Jones invited me to a book presentation in their home of Evan Thomas. And I came there, I didn't know Lenny and Sarah. And but the funny thing happened that Lenny, as you just said in your introduction, somehow it read my columns. Somehow you just put them from the internet or from the newspaper, and he read them, and he started commenting on them. So suddenly I had an audience of one. and then it turned out to be like my very opinionated neighbor Mackie, and the people at the bakery, and my Friday night, the people at the cafe. And then, since it made me, seen and heard, I thought like, it's a good thing that I get a little bit of, way of getting my work out there. So that's why this is here, and Lenny really helped me with this, and Lenny is a good editor, and that's very necessary because my English is not as good as my Dutch, of course. So Lenny, this is to you with many help. Well, and of course you all came to hear about my columns. And so I want to read tonight 2 columns, and I think it would be appropriate to read the very first column first. So this was in October 2012, when we were here for just a few weeks. And it's called The Green Phoenix. Princeton is in the flat Midlands of New Jersey, rising a green phoenix out of the ugliest country in the world. That's how F. Scott Fitzgerald described this university town in 1927. Not much has changed since then. New Jersey may be proud to call itself the Garden State, but it's still home to a wasteland of oil refineries, faded industrial towns, anomalous office buildings, apartment complexes, and identical cheap shopping malls, all strung together along the 12 lanes in the New Jersey Turnpike. The residents only half-kiddingly joke that they tell people where they live, not by the name of their town, but by the number of their turnpike exit. What exit, ma'am? The taxi driver asks, laughing and turning around. I lean forward and smile. I like this man, with his reassuring presence. Softly, he hums along with Aretha Franklin on the car radio while we drive from Newark Airport to my new house. It's hot. About 90 degrees, but he wears a black suit, a wrinkle-free, spotless white shirt, and a bright blue, tightly knotted tie. The air conditioning roars in the car. I'm underdressed in my sleeveless summer dress and bare legs. I just left the continent behind me, a full life, the streets of Amsterdam, where I lived in an old house on a canal, the house where I had my children and hoped to grow old there. But life is unpredictable. This move to the United States offered my family an opportunity we not could get otherwise. And Princeton, my driver says, suddenly excited, waking me up from my nostalgic reveries. He turns, and we drive through Washington Road, through the alley of Dutch elms, and over a bridge above Carnegie Lake, where a lone rower draws a stripe in the still water. Princeton is an island, a magic green surrounded by bridges. Squirrels are jumping between the branches in the trees. The driver no longer sings. He opens a window. A sweet fragrance fills the car, reminding me of summer days long ago when I played barefoot in my father's lawn. When I start humming, the driver looks at me through his rear-view mirror. We drive slowly down a hilly road. Then, in front of us, a thin Gothic towers proudly emerge above the trees. Behind them, still hidden but not for long, is the ivy-covered campus. "This is your destination," he says, braking the car. We look at the clapboard house in front of us, an American dream with a white fence. My eyes get teary in the blasting sunshine. A new Aretha Franklin song starts. I fumble in my bag for the key. The house smells unfamiliar. Inside it's sticky. I hold my breath and turn around with the key still in my hand. The driver looks at me in the rearview mirror while driving away. I hear him humming along with Aretha Franklin.
So I think now I will ask Pia a few questions, and then you will. Oh, this will read another column.
Oh yeah, and I read another
and
column.
and then you will. So that was fun to hear your first column, and you've written 120 since then. Where do you get your ideas?
My ideas come from anything that happens to me. So my kids, I call them like 3 categories. One is the curious mother. So whenever my kids had something that was kind of really amazing and totally different from Holland, I thought I could use that. And the other was the amazed immigrant that I was thinking like, oh, this is so different too. And coming to a different country, you see so many different things. And also...
Such as what?
Well, Holland is a very small country, and it's very organized. It's socialist, so we don't have extremes. We don't have tall puppies. Everything is like this. So we don't have like very rich, very poor. We're actually all the same. We have this. We don't like tall puppies. So that was a big. And another big difference is. That's what I call myself in a role as the slightly cynical observer. The Dutch are cynical, and Americans are much more, open-minded, naive, sweet, and nice, and that's also a big difference. Yeah.
Some of your columns fit into that. One of your first piece in English was the piece for the Washington Post that you did called "Finding Your Voice," sort of in a new language or something, and. You talked there about Hurricane Sandy.
Yes. And
the tree in your front yard that blew down.
Right.
It was uprooted. And this uprootedness is sort of a metaphor that I see you returning to. So I wonder how that affects you and plays into your life now, particularly when you're here at the Institute where there are also a lot of foreign-born people you must feel a bond with other immigrants and exiles and so on.
Right.
Part of the Institute's history.
Yeah. So that was something that really got me, because I think Hurricane Sandy was October, and we arrived in August, September. So we were just here, and everything was, and the Institute has been very welcoming, and it was all nice, and then suddenly this happened, and I realized I signed up for a new life and new experience, but I didn't sign up to die here, and not so fast, and I was really scared about the whole experience, and there's a beautiful drawing, which is the middle one on the blackboard that Eliane made of that experience, and I wrote about it. Hurricane Sandy really. It really scared me, and I felt for the first time really, as the French say, they have the beautiful word dépaysement, you're without your country. And then the beautiful thing happened when I wrote this piece in the Washington Post. I got so many reactions, and I learned that in a way, I think everybody is uprooted in a way. In America, we come all from different countries. And through my, my kind of disconnectedness when this happened, I really connected to many people. So it was a beautiful thing coming out of a bad thing.
Yeah. And the disconnectedness can also happen emotionally as well as geographically too. I mean, people can have a life-changing event that suddenly sort of pulls them out of their past, and something like that can happen. Do you write about that? Is that something you... For example, when your father died, did you write about that?
Yeah, I wrote about when my father died. I had a column actually about the whole experience, and yeah, and it's also part of the memoir that I'm now preparing, and I will read about that a little bit later. And yeah, so yeah, and also a psychologist, so I always look for this combination between whatever hurts and whatever makes you grow.
Yeah. Well, one of the nice things about you, the fact that you were writing nonfiction in the columns, and yet you could have came up as a writer of fiction and of novels and stories, is that your storytelling sort of plays in very nicely to the storytelling. And I'm just telling people this. You have to read the columns to see this, but it really plays in beautifully.
Well, it was very hard for me to write columns because as a fiction writer, you just make up things. And so I constantly wanted to make up things. And luckily Robert, you know, who has been writing by NRC Handelsblad, as you so beautiful say, for I think 20 years now, doing columns. And so he keeps me to like, no, Pia, this is your column. This is not fiction. But it's and I must say many times I really wanted to stop, but now suddenly I really get the hang of it, and I like you know, I like doing it. Yeah.
There's a famous saying that autobiography is fiction without footnotes. Could you talk a little about your Dutchness and what it's like being Dutch here? And how does Dutchness affect you? It's a point of reference. That is, the fact that you are aware of being from a little country in this big country and of the differences gives you all kinds of handholds and things to talk about when you write. But do you see yourself becoming, or your family becoming Americanized at all? And is this good or bad for you as a writer?
Well, I don't think we are getting Americanized. Although it differs per kids. I wrote actually a nice piece about that, you know, because when I moved this here, people were asking, like, do you still speak Dutch to your kids? And I was like, what are they talking about? Do I suddenly, you know, talk in a different language to my kids? But now, after 2.5 years, my kids especially, and even myself, we are looking at normal words and we're thinking, do they really say it that way? So we're losing a little bit of the language. So we try to go, you know, back often. But you know, Holland is still my reference point, and I think when I lose that, when I'm getting Americanized, I don't think there's any sense of writing columns anymore. And I'm just
return to your novels.
return to my novels.
What are the differences you notice between Dutch people and American people?
I think. I think the big difference is that there's such more difference between people in America. So there's not one common American. They are, like, as I said, like either very rich or very poor or very little. There's so much more extremes. And I think because Holland is so small and we have this social, we keep in touch with all these people. So that's a big difference. I think Americans are nicer. There is like a terrible expression.
Not as direct. I mean, the Dutch.
We're very direct.
The Dutch are much more direct and blunt.
Yes,
and this
that's
gets you
true.
into trouble sometimes here, doesn't it? I mean, no, really, with political correctness and.
Well, that's the other thing. Americans are very. I mean, some subjects you don't talk, like religion, sex. What? Money. And the Dutch, we just talk about all these subjects. We don't mind. It's just all in our mind. And sometimes I just start saying these things, and I see like, okay, I should be, threading around these topics and be a little bit, Yeah.
So maybe we could take a sort of a half a break, and you could read the other column you had in mind to read.
Okay, I read another column. I go to my little thing. And so this is also a little bit of a nostalgic column, and it's called Peter and Bill. In Amsterdam, every morning at 7 o'clock, I walk to the bakery around the corner to buy bread. In front of the baker's shop on a wooden bench sat Peter. He was a man of about 60, though he might have been older, or younger for that matter. A fierce, bristling beard, worn shoes, and above all, a loud voice in which he commented on everyone and everything. So, Pia, he never forgot my name, so you are here again. Every morning, the same sentence in that loud voice that echoed across the canal in that early hour. He always gave me the feeling that I must be overly busy, that I would be just so much better off sitting on a bench, watching the sunrise, just like he did. Hello, Peter, I said in turn. Good morning to you. Peter walked his rounds from canal to canal, from Prinsengracht to Keizersgracht, continuing to the Herengracht, and then back. He had his regular audience that he greeted with his custom-made, unchanging comments. I never wondered where he slept. I just assumed that day and night he walked his rounds and in between them sat on that bench, just as I believed when I was in kindergarten that my teacher lived in the classroom. When I'm back in the Netherlands, I always run into Peter, and he greets me as if I've never left. Every city I've ever lived in had this Peter. When I was young, when we drove to my grandparents', we always passed a man who had to turn upon it to himself to direct traffic. Studded with colorful insignia upon a fine suit, he waved his arms in the air, gesturing wildly, but his face always serious. He was a fixed landmark on our route. It did not take long before I saw Bill in Princeton. Grey beard, cap, and in his hand a broom. In the middle of Nassau Street, the divide between town and gown, on one side there's the university, which is stately buildings and ambitious students with their grand plans for the future. On the other side you can find restaurants, banks and shops, two worlds apart, yet they cannot live without each other. The village green is called Palmer Square. Like any green, there's an ice cream shop, a deli and a magazine kiosk. A lawn with some trees, a sculpture, a few benches. On one of these benches sits Bill when he's finished sweeping, his broom beside him like a faithful dog. Bill's task is to sweep Nassau Street sidewalks clean and thoroughly well. He does so entirely at his own initiative. Watch out, do not walk through the dirt pile, he says when I walk next to him. Of course not, I say. He makes sure that I do what I say. Bill walks with a limp and his right arm is partly paralyzed. He has had an accident. Has he fought in Vietnam? Passers-by from outside the city never know quite what to think of him. It strikes me that most people circle around him, as if he is the center of his world and they are the outsiders. Children, of course, all know him. Bill must belong there. Bill just belongs there, although he scares them, threatening with his broom when they ride bikes on the sidewalk. The Peters and Bills of this world have a strong sense of territory and share it with all of us. When I've been away for a while, I'm always reassured to return and see Bill with his broom on Nassau Street, at the center of his world, and now mine.
So, good time now maybe to take questions from you, from all of you, not all at once. Anybody have a question? Yes.
I lived in Holland. 50 years ago, I lived in Holland teaching in Arnhem. And one of the I was in my 20s, God knows. And one of the things I realized over the course of that year is how American I was. And I would be questioned by a lot of my Dutch friends about how did I get to America? And my grandparents had come from Ireland. They were potato farmers. How did I get to be a teacher? because they came from families where they had been teachers for 5 or 6 generations. So my question is this. Living here now, how has that in any way deepened your own sense of what it means to be Dutch? Because I felt it deepened mine about what it meant to be American.
Okay, so the question is if living here, that's what your question is, reconnects me with my being Dutch. I think it's a two-way street. I think living here makes me, and especially since I write, I have to observe, and that makes me very aware of the things that I see. And if I test it with people, then they're always surprised the things I choose for my columns. And for instance, as you always say, that I'm very touched by this political correctness thing. And for instance, what happened is 2 weeks ago we had the Charlie Hebdo thing in France, and this was quite a big thing. And then my Eliana, who drew the thing, she drew actually a painting with Mohammed on front, very small, and she had a funny drawing where she did Charlie Brown selling Charlie Hebdo in Queens. And then, of course, you know, Americans say, like, you cannot, you know, be very careful. This is not the way you do things. And so then I'm aware that we are so easy with doing these kind of things. We are very, and now you would think that Americans are free. Everything is free and freedom, but there are certain limits that I'm even more aware of. Another thing I really learned when I just was here, and I remember Charlotte, my daughter, came home and she was singing this song, "This Country, This of Thee," and she was singing this, and I was like, my daughter singing this, and you know, land where my father died. My father had just died, and I was like, I was so appalled, and I found this whole, the patriotism. I really had to get used to this huge patriotism, and I still have to, you know, but I'm learning to understand. I'm learning to understand the concept of freedom, and yeah. So I'm in the middle.
Right. Americans value it so much. Yes, sir.
In the first story, The Green Phoenix, you refer to the taxi driver playing Aretha Franklin. Then you have another piece here on Woody Allen. Does this suppose that your readers in Amsterdam understand American society?
I don't understand what you mean.
Well,
Do they
you're
understand the
referring to a
references Aretha
specific...
Franklin?
Oh
The
yeah,
question
yeah,
is,
of course,
do
yeah.
they understand popular culture in America, in Holland?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we are very ungeheucht.
We probably have too much American culture in
Yeah, it's very there, but there's a little, as we say, a snake under the grass, because Dutch people think they know everything about America. They are, you know, they are American scholars of America. Even though they've never been there, they know everything, and that's how opinionated we are. And I think the funny thing about my column, and I think the fact that I keep doing it, because normal they keep, you know, columnists for a year at the most, and I'm doing this now for over 2.5 years. I think is that I teach through the little things, and my kids, and you know, the town and kitchen things that I meet, I learn about, and I teach the Dutch a little bit about real life here.
Okay, back there, Mr. Ross, yeah.
I know it's a major issue over there, and I'd be interested in your comments about the different people that are now coming to Holland and Sweden, and especially those countries, Denmark also, I think.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing, because Holland always was this country where everything was, you know, was possible, and we were just free, and big immigrants, and suddenly there is we were the most tolerant people, and that goes back to the 17th century, when even we were accepting every people, religions and everything. But then suddenly things have changed and become sour in Holland, and it's we are very frightened. And Charlie Hebdo really scared the Dutch people. We have had the Jewish places now extra secured, and so really scared. Actually, last night someone entered into the main news channel and just kind of hijacked the whole thing. So there was we couldn't have the evening news. It was very, very scary. So I think Holland is changing, and there's like this big right-wing people who want to get all the people, Muslim people, out of the country. It's scary. It's very scary. It's a very negative thing. So Holland is not any longer just that cute, beautiful country. It's getting a sour touch to it.
This side of the room, Elizabeth.
So Pia, Lanny in his wonderful introduction to you mentioned that you were a late bloomer, but as far as I can tell, you've been blooming on lots of fronts. And one of the interesting things is, how did you make some of the transitions you've made from earlier careers or other fronts? Was it something that inspired you to want to take up writing more publicly about your feelings, about your thoughts, a certain author? I mean, what led you on that journey, and do you have yet another career after this one?
So Elizabeth is asking what made me change careers. But as Lenny said, I'm also a psychotherapist, and I worked for years at my own clientele at home. I also I did the same work also for a business, and I worked as a business consultant. And so what changed my whole perspective was the year my daughter was born, and it was 2000, and she was very sick. And in fact, she was, we were told that she wouldn't have a chance to survive. And then I decided to just give up everything, my whole career, my work, and just stay with her, just to see, whatever time she would have, that I would stay with her. And then, and she had leukemia. And then after a year, she went into spontaneous remission, and which was, of course, the most beautiful thing ever. But I was at a sort of loss of things. I didn't have my career anymore. I mean, I could have built it again, and my clients were still, my patients were still waiting. But I felt that I was totally changed. And the only thing that I could hide in was in my writing. And I had something that is called, I didn't know that, it was called the midnight disease, where I woke up in the middle of the night and I started writing, which was a totally new thing for me. And I couldn't stop. And in no way I intended to publish things, but eventually that's how it worked out. So that's my big career change. And I'm happy with that. And I don't think, well, you never know. I might change.
Okay, yeah, who's that? Fraser.
Dutch have handled, that's fine. The Dutch have handled the drug issues a lot differently than we have here
Yes.
in the United States. I'm not sure I like either way. Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, that's this Mr. asked that the Dutch have a totally different view on drugs, as on alcohol, as on many other things. So if you go to Holland, as you all know, you go to a coffee shop and don't ask for coffee because they don't sell coffee, you sell drugs. And and actually my sons went to this high school, and next to high school is this the wild, what is it called, Bow or something. It's just a shop where they sell drugs. And so we keep it open. It's there, but we keep track of people who buy it. So that's the way we actually try to keep it in contain it. The other thing, and I wrote a column about that too, is we had these people in Holland who sweep the streets, and these were actually people who had an alcohol problem. And they were just, at home and getting money from the government. And then this organization hired these people and paid them with alcohol. So they came in every morning, they get their first beer, it's very scripted, they get their first beer at 7 in the morning, which keeps them till 11, then they get their second beer. And I think Americans find this very strange. This is the, this is the government that does this and helps these people get through the day. And it's very scary. I must say, the thing is with alcohol, when we came here, alcohol limit in Holland was 16. Now it's just at 18. It was like 16. My kids were, close to that age. And I was kind of so happy that I felt they were more secure here because alcohol was not allowed here for that age. And then I learned there is if you don't allow it, people do it anyway, and it gets secret. And then you see kids who just get drunk and they so there's two, of course, as you said, it's two sides to it. And I really have to get used to both worlds. And I don't think there's one solution. I think the Dutch way. Yeah, the other thing is that what I want to mention, and I have this beautiful column. I wrote a beautiful column. There's also a drawing, if you can see it here. Maybe you can. So this is Amsterdam, and this is where we lived next to the alley. And there's parts of Amsterdam that's still a red light district, and it happened to be close to our house. And actually, since we left, but we lived among the hookers. And nobody actually thought twice about it. It was just a normal thing. And my son, my oldest, when he was 3, he was just asked, like, why is the women just sitting there in their underwear? So there's nothing. We're so used to it. And then you have the American tourists who come and they sit in buses and they walk and they go to the red light district. And we think they're like crazy because it's forbidden here. And then they just, so there's two sides. I don't think the Dutch go to, they don't find this strange. And so this was actually on a column I wrote on Mr. What's his name? The politician who actually, Spitzer, yeah. And so this was about Spitzer, and
It was about Spitzer.
who had to see when he had to,
Client number 11.
client number 11, he had to go like all his way, to be able to see this hooker. So I compared it to my.
One of the things that Pia does really nicely in her columns is she will take an episode that happened to her personally, or her family, or her somebody she knows, and then sort of just draw this out into a larger point. That all of a sudden you realize you're it's like a camera pulling back, and you begin to see the wide angle. And you don't know if I'm going to ask you this, but could you talk about the column you're working on this week that you may or may not do about the Super Bowl and about the ice no, seriously.
Okay.
Just how you got there and about the ad on the NFL.
Yeah, so I try to write about things that happen, although my column is on Tuesday, so then the Super Bowl, which will also be covered in Holland, will be kind of old news. But still, I'm thinking, I'm just looking at the ads. I'm very intrigued by the ads and the way they use the ads of, in this case, abuse in families to make up for what went wrong at the NFL. And so I'm researching this topic a little bit, and then I want to write about it. So I can do this on Sunday night when I've seen the Super Bowl, and then it's just in time for Eliana to do a drawing, and yeah. So that's how I kind of work my way around the topic, and then I have like some other topics that I'm considering, and yeah.
Okay. But the wonders were also related to when you fell on the ice and.
Oh yeah, that's true. I fell on the ice. I fell on the black, which is a beautiful name, the black ice. And of course you don't see it, that's why it's called black ice. And I stepped out of the car and I was in the hospital. And I ended up in Princeton hospital, and with totally blue and bruises, and my son with me. And then that's indeed how it happened. And they asked me some questions to figure out if there was maybe something like abuse or that I was really falling. And that made me think of, you know, the ad for the Super Bowl, which is it's a very touching ad, I must say. The one about this lady pretending, calling a pizza line, and she's calling actually to tell there's something really wrong.
Call 911.
Yeah. It's a very.
It'll be on the Super.
It'll be on the Super Bowl. You can have a preview, and so that will probably be.
It's on YouTube now or something.
It's on YouTube now. That's where I saw it. Yeah.
So maybe just one more question, and then I want to see if I can get Pia to back
Joy.
over here. Yeah. Yeah.
Goedenavond. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about what your style is in terms of writing. Do you write still at midnight, or do you, when you get an idea for writing, do you kind of let it distill for a while and then write about it, or do you have a regular routine every morning, a time set apart that you write? You know, what is your routine in terms
Yeah, what's
of
my
writing?
routine? So the question is, if I have a routine for writing? Well, the midnight disease started when I had 3 kids who were also they were all 3 actually very sicklish kids, and I brought them to bed, and I always fell asleep reading them, you know, telling them stories, and then my kids were like, "Mom, how does the story end?" And I was asleep. So for those early years, I slept, you know, very early, and I woke up about 2. And luckily, now they're bigger and have their own room. It's easier for me. But I still wake up very early, and I tuck in also very early, and I like the early hours in the morning to write. And luckily now they're also at school, which makes life easier. And but I'm still very focused on my time, and I'm very, very careful with my time. But I must admit that I just like writing so much, and I have to structure. Because I could just go on and just totally freak out on one thing, one piece, and I don't care if it fits in something or not. So yeah.
Okay. Maybe was there somebody over there protesting?
Yeah, enjoy. And there's 2 questions.
Where is the
Okay.
protest? Okay.
Joy.
Thank you for letting me ask
Yeah.
one more. I wanted to address your fiction. And because I've had the chance to work with you on a very short, compelling piece, which is on our website, that I've not stopped thinking about. And I think it's probably one of your first fiction pieces in English. And so I have a Wild River Review. And you can also, and you can also find it on Pia's website under fiction, if you go to her website. It's very short, but it's very compelling, and I keep thinking it's the beginning of a novel. I've said that to you
Yes.
in emails. And after you've talked about your columns, go to either Pia's or my website and read it and see if you think it shouldn't be a book. But I guess I wanted to ask you, because I know you've been under these deadlines for columns, and that takes a lot of mental energy. Have you given any thought to fiction? And that particular piece, did you write it in Dutch first and then in English, or did you try to write that in English?
I toyed with it in my own language, and then it is a different way. So it's very different. Writing in Dutch, you start differently. It's just totally different. So I think I did it for the Wild River Review. I did it in an American way. Yeah, and it is a difficult thing for me still, as I said earlier, to write in a column, because my easy thing is to write fiction, and it's my first language, and it's also much easier for me, and it's true that I'm working now on a memoir about my daughter, which is also not fiction. So my plan is to have this memoir out of my system. It needs to be written. It's just time that it's there. And then I really want to, and then I don't know what NRC is still, how long they still want my, but I'm really ready to, to do fiction, and the man in the column would be definitely part of it. Yeah.
Maybe that's a good segue to maybe you could read a little from your memoir.
Okay.
Now.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so this is as we said, this is about my daughter who was very sick, and I'm just so happy that she recovered. But it was a whole year of anxiety and pain and totally scared, and it totally changed me. And this is a piece when we we had to decide about the treatment, and I didn't want to have her treated. I just wanted to have her home. We have the results from the bone marrow test, the oncologist began. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon when we entered his office. He was a somehow chubby man with a reddish moustache, which made him look older than he probably was. 2 medical students, thin blonde girls who could have been sisters, stood in a corner of the room, huddled behind a notebook. Is it okay that they are here? The doctor asked, looking towards the girls. I nodded. I was afraid that if I said no, that they would disappear. Somehow, I hoped they might turn into guardian angels. I held my daughter firmly in my arms. She was limp from the anesthesia, looking paler than pale. Today, we will discuss what is best for Charlotte, the doctor continued. His voice sounded flat, rehearsed, scripted. He wanted to do this properly. He knew that I would remember this conversation for the rest of my life. The air was thick as syrup. We are here to discuss the treatment plan, the doctor said. He unfolded one article to show us. There was a table in bold letters showing 35 children with the same form of leukemia. Their treatments were mentioned, the drugs, the operations. They made it till they were 2 years old, others till they were 6. None of them survived. I felt like a bird floating above the room, above the doctor, above the thin blonde girls who could have been sisters with their notepads. Below me was the table with tea for me, a glass of water for Robert. I even floated out of my body, looking down at myself, a mother with her limp, pale child in her arms. My daughter's feet kicked against my belly. I recognized her movements. They were similar to those when she was in my womb. Slow shifts, then sudden kicks. Charlotte, I said aloud. And it was as if I woke up from a dream in which she told me her name. Through the closed window, I could see the meadows behind the hospital, great open fields filled with the lush green grasses of summer. I could almost smell it. If I went there, the grasses would bend, then spring back with every step I took. It would be like dancing with my child in my arms, further and further away. At the end of the meadow, I would cross the highway very carefully, and from there walk over the cobblestones and the asphalt sidewalks into my town. Oh, it would take some time. As the darkness would fall, I would start running, holding her even closer to my body. But I could get there. With blisters on my feet, I would reach the canal. I'd open the door to my house and climb the stairs, the 30 steps of the spiral staircase, until I was in her room, our room at the 5th floor. The doctor coughed. He tried to get my attention, wanted to know what I thought about what he said. About what? I asked. The treatment, he said. What should we do? I searched for my bag, which I'd put on the floor near my feet, my red backpack with all the things I'd grabbed the day before, my toothbrush, my pyjama, her lavender knitted vest with the embroidered giraffe, and zipped it shut. I put on my sweater. I put Charlotte snug in her sling. I stood up, pulling the backpack over one shoulder. What are you doing? The doctor asked. I saw in his eyes that something was wrong. I'm ready to leave, I said. Leave? Why? He asked. Because I'm going home, I said. All 3 of us are going home. But we're here to discuss the treatment plan, he repeated. I said to Robert, let's go, but he already was following me towards the door. We stepped outside the hospital, and the sky became another roof over our heads. A breeze blew through our hair, and the sun warmed our skin, still tingling from the air conditioning. Charlotte calmed down and still hiccuped a little bit when we arrived in town. It was high summer. Once again, it was just the 3 of us, the trinity that we had been since the moment of her conception. Charlotte, closely held to my body in her yellow sling, blinked in the still bright afternoon light and closed her eyes. She dozed off. Robert and I held hands. Everything appeared normal. No one stared at us. We were an ordinary couple with a baby, cheerful parents who had just escaped the heat in their house to take a late afternoon walk to buy a strawberry ice cream cone. We sat up on a bench and watched the boats floating by. They came in all colors and sizes. There was a big boat full of students, a boat with a man with a captain's hat and a woman in bikini, sunning herself on the forecastle. The wind lifted their hair, the champagne tinkled in tall glasses. I wanted to wed myself to the simple pleasure of a summer day in the city, being an ordinary couple with their new baby out in the sun. A few snatches of Ravel's Bolero floated from an open window of a large house across the street. A fully rigid sloop sailed by slowly. On the bow sat a girl in a tight red dress, flirting shamelessly with the man behind the wheel. Flirting shamelessly is what I did when I met Robert. We made eye contact in a huge crowd, and then we started to find our way towards each other. I watched them until I could only see a hint of her red dress. I could have sat there for hours. I wanted to steal time from the future and pull it into this moment, capture it in my hands so I could hold it forever. Now it was getting chillier by the minute. I knew I had to stand up soon, leave the spot, but I wanted to postpone that moment. A few more minutes, I told Robert, but it kept getting colder. We were human beings. We needed sleep, we needed food, and whether we wanted to or not, face the next day. Robert pulled me out of my daze and I left reluctantly. My legs were asleep, my ankles were weak. My daughter was 2 weeks old, I was 2,000 years old, and at the same time I was a child, a 6-year-old frightened child. Thank you.